look at this town. This is Manila, before the Japs took it. These people are friends. You'll be meeting them or people like them soon. Take a good look at this town. This is Manila, before the Japs took it. These people are friends. You'll be meeting them or people like them soon. This is the Philippines in 1940, a modern, civilized country, a piece of America, peopled with fellow Americans. This is the Philippines, December 26, 1941, the day after Christmas. Jap bombers are coming. They're coming in spite of the fact that Manila was declared an open city to spare it from destruction. We didn't know then, as we know now, how little the Japanese respected international law. An open city? Open for Mitsubishis and Zeros. Open for fire, destruction, death. This was Manila's punishment for flying the American flag, for being an American city. These scenes were taken by Japanese cameramen and captured by us. Here you see them on their triumphal march toward Manila. Where they found opposition, they destroyed it. Also destroyed without opposition. Christmas 1941. Goodwill toward men. Finally, they marched through Manila. Manila, the whole Philippines was theirs. Or was it? Not quite. Not for 5 months yet. Not for 2 bloody battlefields. Not for Bataan and Corregidor. This is Corregidor, the rock. The rock in the gears of the Japanese war machine. The Japs are bombing us from outside. Look at those lamps sway. And still they kept coming. Here is more captured Jap film, the last of it. This is 5 months later as the little men closed in on Corregidor Fortress. The survivors were starving, wounded, short of medicine. They blasted us, burned us out until we surrendered. This is what was left of us. Prisoners of war. No, prisoners of the Japs. There's a difference.
Name, Jonathan M. Wainwright. Rank, Lieutenant General. Serial number 02131.
This is the start of the brutal death march. Many of these American and Filipino fighters were tortured and murdered. May 5th, 1942, a tragic day for us. We lost the Philippines. A tragic day for the Filipinos. They lost their freedom. But it was a great day for Hirohito, for Tojo, his head man. Whatever became of him? and for the Japanese soldiers. Look at this map. This is how the Jap topside saw it in 1941, right after Pearl Harbor. Vast, incredibly rich, the key to their push southward through the Pacific. The Jap stepping stone to New Guinea, Borneo, the Celebes, Java, Australia. Yes, even to our own west coast. They had to have it. Here's a $64 question. How many islands in the Philippines? The Japs knew the answer. 7,000. 7,000 islands. 7,000 stakes to the richest treasures in the South Pacific. Philippine chromite, the largest deposit in the world. Basis for chromium, stainless steel, and steel forgings. Gold, iron, coal, copper, oil. Most important of all, a population of 17 million. Slave labor for the Jap war machine. These are some of the reasons why they wanted the Philippines. Okay, you're heading back. Let's have a briefing. Let's take another look at the map. Philippines, 7,000 islands, 7,000 steps nearer Japan. 35 P-38 miles to Jap-held Borneo. 515 Liberator miles to Jap-held Indochina. 405 Flying Fort miles to Jap-held Hong Kong. 65 B-25 miles to Jap-held Formosa. 1,800 Super Bomber miles to Tokyo. That's how our topside sees it. A population of 17 million. 17 million people who trusted our friendship, fellow Americans. We promised them their independence for July 4th, 1946. We've pledged ourselves to go in and see that they get it on that date, or even sooner.
17 million people, 7,000 islands. Yeah, the Philippines are one hell of a big place. It's a good idea for you to know something about this country and the people that live in it. Let's go back 400 years to 1521. That's the year Magellan sailed into this place on his way around the world. He landed on the island of Samar in the middle of the group. The Philippines got their name from Magellan's boss, Spanish King Philip, the great-grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella, who financed Columbus. Incidentally, Magellan made the mistake about a month later of leading an invasion. He got into a scrap with some of the natives. His round-the-world cruise came to a quick finish here on the island of Mactan. This is Magellan's monument. The Philippine hombres were tough fighters then, and they're still tough. Don't like invaders. Don't like Japs. See this cathedral? And this one? The architecture's Spanish. Here's part of an old Spanish wall. Philippine money. Get the name, peso. That's Spanish too. You'll find lots of Spain all through the Philippines. Reason? The Spaniards ran the Philippines for 3 centuries. That brings us right up to 1898. This is where we came in. Admiral Dewey. Fire when ready, Gridley. Battle of Manila. Too bad you can't see this in action. We didn't have a Signal Corps combat camera crew around in those days. Yeah, that's when we came in, the first time. For the past 40 years, 17 million Filipinos shared Uncle Sam with 130 million Americans. They have many universities, among them the great State University of the Philippines. This is the University of Santo Tomas. They've been studying here for more than 3 centuries. Silliman University on the island of Negros. No studying here during the occupation. The Japs used the classrooms for army barracks. They learned the 3 R's American style in high schools, grade schools, everything taught in English. Kindergarten, just like at home. They shared our daily setting-ups. School for farming. The Filipinos also shared another kind of American school tradition, one of the U.S. Army's oldest and best, our West Point. It's the general. This picture was taken before the war, when he was in command of the military defense of the Philippines. There were some Americans who saw the need for organizing the defense of the Philippines long before the war. Working with the Philippine government, they set out to build a tight, hard army of Philippine regulars. Even long before Pearl Harbor, the Jap menace was there, ambushed behind diplomatic lingo and grins. Maybe you'll get to see the military academy on Luzon. It's modeled after our own West Point, right down to the uniforms and precision drilling of the cadets. The Filipino GIs were trained like us. We shared with them in this, too. There were 4 of these tough Filipino GIs for every American fighting and dying on Bataan and Corregidor. They've shared the fighting. They'll share the final victory parade. Supreme Court of the Philippines. They shared our long tradition of justice. Those fine, intelligent faces are the faces of civilized men, guarding the laws of a civilized nation, dealing in civilized justice, a term the Tokyo criminals don't understand. And here is their House of Congress. The Filipino legislators built their constitution based on ours. They made their laws as we do, by the consent of the governed. Laws for the Filipinos, by the Filipinos. They had a president. When the Japs invaded, he set up a government in exile in Washington to be ready for the day when we would liberate the Philippines and once more bring it into the society of free nations. His name, Manuel Quezon. Quezon did not live to see this moment of liberation. He died in America. But his vice president, Sergio Osmeña, is carrying on the same fight. Like Quezon, the second president of the Philippine Commonwealth wants only to see his country and his people living in independence. They are a deeply religious people. 90% of them are Christians. The Philippines is the only Christian nation in the Far East. They've been Christian ever since the Spaniards first got there. Like us, they're a mixture of a lot of races. If you hit a beach like this down south on the island of Mindanao, you'll meet this kind of Filipino citizen, the Moro. The Moros are Mohammedans. They look peaceful here, but they can fight like hell. Their favorite weapon is the bolo, a wicked piece of steel a top sergeant could shave with. They use it on everything, including their enemies. They fought the Spaniards for over 300 years. After 1898, they fought us. Blackjack Pershing battled against them in his captain's bars long before he battled against the fathers of the Nazis at Chateau-Thierry and the Argonne. In 1913, they buried the bolo as an instrument of war and took it up as a tool for peace and prosperity. They joined hands with the rest of the peace-loving Filipinos and earned their right to independence. Their biggest town is a place you've been hearing about, Zamboanga, the place where monkeys have no tails. That's one of the monks. See? Just a stump of a tail. When we get in, the Moros may put on a USO dance for us. It'll be like this. These Moros are a race of Filipinos with a culture and traditions, with manners, with beautiful clothes, and with pride in themselves. They have learned to trust us because we have learned to trust and respect them as fellow Americans. They dance, but they're hard-working. You might see a Moro woman husking rice like this. Or you might see this kind of human transportation, or this kind of house moving. Or you might see this on Saturday night, or this on Monday morning, and this every day in the week. A lot of them earn their living out of the sea. Make no mistake, the Moros are not fuzzy wuzzies. The lowlands of Mindanao lie 10 degrees above the equator. Some of you may find yourselves in the Jungle Mountains, or maybe 500 or 600 miles north on some of the other islands. Cebu, Mindoro, or Luzon. Here you'll meet another kind of Filipino citizen, the Negritos. These pint-sized guys are primitive and don't care who knows it. They don't like cities. They don't like clothes. They do like hunting, roast pig, and dancing. You can get them to like GIs by treating them with the respect you'd give a 6-footer. And here is another group of Philippine citizens called Igorots. Don't be fooled by appearances. They're jungle farmers, and let's put it this way. They never got degrees in any engineering school, but look at these rice fields cut out of the sides of a mountain. Maybe this wouldn't be tough to do if you had a flock of bulldozers and tractors, but this is all hand-carved. It took them a couple of centuries, but they did it, figured out all the problems, laid in an irrigation system, built steps and paths so they could get around with their water buffaloes for plowing and planting, made the whole thing pay back in rice. And it's beautiful. Have a dance? This one is done with rice stalks. The Igorot women are as much an eyeful as their landscape. Fathers, brothers, and husbands of these women are piled in graves on Bataan, where they rode on the tanks and fell side by side with thousands of our own guys. There are some important things you should know about the Filipino woman. She is treated at all times by her menfolk with the greatest respect. She is devoted to her religion and to her family. You'll find her modest and modern. She listens to the radio, goes to the movies, dances. She understands and appreciates the meaning of a liberated Philippines as well as the men in her family. Yes, you'll find her modern and modest and friendly. Don't mistake her friendliness. Don't get too playful. She's used to being treated with the same respect we give our own womenfolk back home. You'll find her working, taking care of the family, outdoor girls, sophisticated ladies, Moro ladies in a harem. These Filipino women live by their Mohammedan religion, live by it strictly. Usually you won't see them outside their homes unless accompanied by their husband or menfolk. Filipino girls wear models you don't see on a pinup. These are called butterfly sleeves. It's the national dress. Soda fountain cuties, blues singers, women in white, jitterbugs. If you're lucky, you'll be invited to the homes of Filipinos. They're great family fellows, That's right, so are we. You'll get a chance to meet the folks. You'll also be introduced to a few dishes you probably never found in Mom's icebox. Don't let them throw you. Among others, there's puchero, the corned beef and cabbage of the Philippines, made with chicken and cabbage, string beans, and the sweet cousin of the Idaho potato called kamote. The bread and butter of the Philippines are fish and rice. If you're even luckier and get invited on a picnic, you'll get the best treat of all, suckling pig roasted on an open fire, the Filipino version of a barbecue. It's called lechon. You'll probably be seeing lots of local food emporiums like these. You'll probably also be hungry and curious. This stuff will taste as good as it looks, but you might be buying dysentery. Let the mess sergeant do the buying. Follow all the rules. Don't eat uncooked food, green fruits, or raw vegetables. Don't drink unboiled water. Keep on the ball with your health by not forgetting anything you've learned, and by relearning everything you've forgotten. And here's a tip you gotta remember. The Japs have been around for a couple of years. They've been spreading propaganda and lies, and some other things even more poisonous. Watch your step. Watch your health. Yeah, the great American pastime. In Luzon or Louisiana, in Mindanao or Minnesota, it's the same old game. Filipinos go for our sports. Softball in homegrown uniforms. Water babies. The ponies. The same cheering crowds. The same also-rans. But this little number is strictly Filipino. It's called sipa, meaning kick. That's it, it's tennis without a racket. You keep the ball in the air with your legs. It calls for fast footwork. Maybe you'll get a chance to play it. Boxing out in the open. The juniors take to it like champs. Talking of champs, here's one you'll remember. Seferino Garcia, once world's middleweight champ. A Filipino boy. Another Filipino fight champ was Pancho Villa, former holder of the flyweight crown. Fair play, democracy, are at the bottom of American sports. The Filipinos take to them because they take to us. Do these remind you of home? And look, Joe, don't be surprised if around midday you suddenly find yourself all alone on a street. It's another old Spanish custom, siesta time. Get set for hot weather. We're right around the equator. March to May is generally the hottest time of the year. The heat is usually sticky, sweaty. But don't kid yourself. Siesta or not, these people know how to work and have plenty of big-time jobs to work at. Lumber, big timber, mahogany, hardwoods. The foothills and mountains on the islands are covered with them. The Japs had their eyes slanted on this stuff, saw it in terms of planes and ships long before we stopped thinking they were just dream boys. But millions of feet of good lumber was deliberately destroyed by the Filipinos before the Japs had a chance to grab it. Sugarcane, thousands of acres under cultivation. The Filipino sugar bowl was one of the world's biggest and richest. More than 1 million men and women kept filling it. It went out by boatloads. Coconuts. The Japanese wanted control of this business too. Know why? Coconut oil makes glycerin. Glycerin makes high explosives. High explosives make supermen. Supermen make war. Rubber. The Philippines have this white gold growing in their backyards. Tobacco, cutting it, bringing it in. Here in one of the factories, they're rolling the leaf. Perfectos, stogies, maybe rope. But it all adds up to a big-time business. And here's the real rope, the McCoy, Manila hemp, grown from the ground up. The most famous and oldest industry in the 7,000 islands. This man's slicing the fibers of the abaca plant. Shredding out the long, tough strands. It's dried, then twined. Back in the old Nantucket Clipper days, Yankee traders tied up with Manila hemp in ports over the 7 seas. War or peace, it's still sailing the 7 seas. No other country comes even near producing as much. Factories, machines, workers handling every kind of skilled job. The kind of people that can run their own country. The kind of people that want peace in the Far East. But also the kind of people that started learning a new job on the double. A trigger-squeezing job we taught them, while the Japs were landing. The kind of people that went into the hills as guerrillas and fought the Jap army for 2 years because they knew what they wanted, knew what they had to do to get it. The kind of people that got into GI issue and trained in American camps. The kind of people that are marching back with you. The kind of people that idolize this American because he stands for everything we promised and are doing for the Philippines. The kind of people that want their children to grow up, as our kids will grow up, in a world without fascist dictators. Yeah, we're coming back to those 7,000 islands, to those 17 million Americans.
This isn't just another movie. Take it from me. These people aren't natives. They aren't beggars. They have cities and farms and industries. They have schools and courts and a constitution. They also have pride and patriotism and self-respect. They love freedom. They'll die for it. They have died for it. Don't throw your money around. For 2 years, the Japs have looted the Philippines, and there's probably very little left in the stores for the 17 millions who live there. Don't get out of line either. For years, the Japs have smeared anti-American propaganda in China, Burma, Malaya, and among the millions of Filipinos. They filled them full of lies about us. Don't give them a chance to broadcast. I told you so. Just one word more. It's a word that covers a lot of ground. It covers 48 states. It covers 7,000 islands. The word is American. The Filipinos are American. Treat them like Americans. And Joe, don't for 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute, ever forget that last message sent by a GI who saw his starved comrades, Americans and Filipinos, dying around him at Corregidor.
What you are about to hear now is a transcript of the radio messages that came out of Fort Mills, Corregidor on May 5th.
They are not near yet. We are waiting for God only knows what. The white flag is up. Everyone is bawling like a baby. They're piling dead, wounded soldiers in our tunnel. Corregidor used to be a nice place. It's haunted now. Get this to my mother. My love to Pa, Joe, Sue, Mac, Carrie, Joy, and Paul. Tell Joe, wherever he is, give him hell for us.
Joe, you know who he means. Give him hell. Keep giving him hell till we get to Tokyo.
Army presents The Big Picture, an official report produced for the armed forces and the American people.
When you're in the Army, you get a chance to do a lot of traveling, see a lot of sights, and meet all kinds of interesting people. For me, some of the most interesting have been right here in our own country. My name's Sergeant Stuart Queen, host for The Big Picture. A good percentage of ideas for The Big Picture is taken right out of our history books. Other stories feature current Army activities of interest to the nation. But once in a while, something unusual comes along, tying in the present with the past, and we come up with a warm, human interest story. In my work, I get around the country quite a bit. It's part of my job. And whenever I'm in this particular vicinity, along this stretch of road, I stop by a quaint little restaurant called Charlie's Harbor Inn. Because it was here at Charlie's, this story happened some months ago. It was right here I discovered for myself that truth can be stranger than fiction. It was the kind of incident you read about in a novel or see in a grade B movie. But if anyone told you it was a true story, well, nobody'd believe it in 1,000 years, and I wouldn't blame them. But this story really did happen, I know, because I was there when it did, and I saw it all.
Anything wrong, officer?
This your car?
Yeah, why?
That's why.
So help me, officer. I didn't even know it was there.
Let me see your license.
Look, officer, I've only been here about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
I was just making an important phone call.
Don't I know you from somewhere?
Now, look here, officer. I'm an honest, law-abiding citizen. I've never been in trouble with the police or anybody else. Why, I never even...
Hey, okay, forget it. You ever been in the service?
Yeah, but what's that got to do with it?
Never mind that. Just answer the question. When did you serve?
World War II, in the Army.
Where? What part of the world?
The Pacific. Say, what is this, an Inquisition?
Take it easy, buddy. Take it easy. Where in the Pacific?
I started in Australia, then New Guinea, New Britain, the Admiralties, and let's see, the Philippines.
The Philippines? Where in the Philippines?
Mostly Leyte and Luzon.
Aha, Luzon.
We hit Lingayen Gulf, then right down to Manila.
You were in the Battle of Manila?
From the kickoff till the final whistle.
Santo Tomas. Mean anything to you?
I rode the back of the first tank in.
I thought I recognized you.
Me? From where?
From Santo Tomas. You see, I was one of the civilian prisoners there on Manila that you and your outfit liberated.
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, if this ain't the... Look, you got a minute?
Sure.
Let me buy you a cup of coffee?
Yeah, sure.
Look, whoever thought that...
Well, you'd never believe it, I know that.
After all these years...
Here was a veteran of World War II, and here was a man he helped liberate. Both meeting for the first time since that historic Battle of Manila in 1945.
Peg, will you get us a couple of cups of coffee?
2 cups of coffee?
As I said before, a true story, stranger than fiction, taking place right before my eyes.
Man, you've added a few pounds here and there.
Food's better over here, and the wife's a good cook.
Say, don't I remember your wife at Santo Tomas? Kind of frail?
That's right. After you arrived, we had to take her out on a stretcher.
How is she now?
Couldn't be better. Matter of fact, we got 4 kids.
4?
Yeah.
That's great.
My wife and I often talk about those days. We never did get much of a chance to thank you and your outfit for liberating us. I'll never forget the first day you arrived at Santo Tomas. How'd your outfit get there so soon?
Well, it was all part of the stepped-up liberation of the Philippines. As I recall... You really want to hear about it?
Yeah, I sure would.
Well, as I recall, the GIs had taken Leyte and landed on Mindoro, the island directly south of Luzon. So my outfit and a lot of others were ready for the main event. We hit the beach at Lingayen Gulf, about 100 miles north of Manila. We thought we'd be moving right into the teeth of Jap resistance, but we were wrong. That was to come later. We pushed on down the valley toward Manila, cleaning out little pockets of resistance where we found them. Out ahead of us, Air Force and Navy planes were softening up the way. Wondering what had happened to the enemy. And for a while there, it looked like we were tourists having ourselves a real ball. Along the way, one of the GIs picked up an innocent-looking piece of paper, which turned out to be a Japanese field order. It stated, "All Filipinos found on the field of battle were subject to immediate execution." This applied to all Filipinos in Manila. Filipino guerrillas brought in reports that American and Allied prisoners were starving and being mistreated in the city. So we stepped up the pace in the outskirts of Manila and finally established contact with the enemy. But we soon lost it, and we realized that the Japs were withdrawing to the heart of the city. At Grace Park, where the monument stands, snipers took pot shots at us and slowed down our advance somewhat. And the only satisfaction I recall here was that my outfit was the first to enter Manila proper. A fierce battle suddenly developed in, of all places, Rizal Stadium, Manila's baseball park. The enemy had dug himself in under the stands, and we slugged it out with him with no cover. Rizal Stadium, a baseball park. No game today. Then we raced into the University of Santo Tomas and liberated, along with you, hundreds of American and Allied internees. It had been 3 years since this pathetic group of prisoners had seen a free American or a square meal. Everyone in Santo Tomas was fortunate that there had been U.S. Army and Navy nurses who had been captured on Corregidor to care for you during those dark years. After we arrived, wires were sent home by the internees. and many replies came back in a few hours, affecting some noticeably. But for everyone, the liberation was a big celebration party. Kids who'd had no toys for 3 years now had giant-sized ones. And all of us were discussing how wonderful it was that the nightmare was over, at last. But the nightmare wasn't all over. The enemy started shelling us at Santo Tomas. We saw internees who'd survived the 3 years as prisoners killed by the incoming fire. I'll never forget how the shelling of this non-military target continued for several days while we evacuated the seriously ill and injured. Finally, the shelling of Santo Tomas let up. The Japs needed their artillery fire more urgently elsewhere. Then the internees were evacuated to the States, most of them by plane. But I guess you'd remember more about that evacuation than I would.
I'll never forget it. If you'd been a few more days rescuing us, I don't think my wife could have held out. But she made it okay, thanks to you and your buddies.
That's the way the ball bounces. You never know when you can help the next guy.
Yeah. I remember when I left Luzon, the battle in Manila seemed to be getting worse.
Yeah, it sure was.
What with the excitement of going back to the States after being a prisoner for 3 years, I never did get the dope straight on how the final stages of the battle went. It's all kind of fuzzy in my mind. All I know is we won, but it was quite a scrap, wasn't it?
It was rough.
Yeah, I know. How'd you make out after I left?
Well, we got ourselves a good taste of street fighting. Being jungle GIs up till then, we found we had a lot to learn about fighting in city streets and big office buildings. But we learned fast. Combat is one thing for sure, a good teacher.
How'd you come out?
Oh, me personally, okay, but not so for some of the others. The deeper we got into Manila, the more fanatical the Jap resistance became. They couldn't escape, and they wouldn't surrender, so they fought till they died, most of them anyway. Our casualties were heavy. And the more we moved into the heart of the city, the more the enemy took advantage of the huge government buildings for defensive positions. Some of the buildings had to be ripped apart stone by stone before we could continue our advance. The enemy defensive plan soon became apparent. He was fighting delaying actions to allow his troops to cross the Pasig River, which cuts Manila east and west right through the middle. We pressed forward as fast as we could through fantastic tangles of broken buildings. Each Jap unit crossed the Pasig River, a bridge was destroyed, leaving one less for us when we reached the river. Our troops found out the hard way just about all there is to know about street-to-street, building-to-building combat. And the more we learned, the faster we moved, denying the enemy the advantage of a leisurely withdrawal. Those Japs who couldn't pull back dug in and fought till they died. Many Filipinos braved frontline fire, handing out cigars or candy to show their gratitude to us. The enemy had orders from the Imperial High Command: hold Manila or burn it. The torch was put to those parts of Manila the Japs could no longer hold. Barrels and drums bombs of gasoline and motor oil were detonated by the Japs inside buildings from one end of Manila to the other. And through all of the inferno, the GIs kept up the initiative, carrying the attack forward toward the Pasig River. Firefighting equipment which had survived the street fighting was used, but it was hardly worth the effort. The fire gained momentum, burning city blocks at a time, consuming everything in its path that would burn, and it seemed to reach its peak of destruction at night. The Battle of Manila had reached a decisive phase. We were north of the Pasig River, and the Japs were south and moving into the famed old walled city called Intramuros. We kept the enemy pinned down with our fire while we brought up troops to prepare for a boat crossing of the Pasig. Several times we saw General MacArthur supervising the direction of battle. At one moment he gazed out across Manila Harbor at an island of rock called Corregidor. No doubt he recalled how the Japanese had attacked the Philippines in December 1941. In May 1942, the enemy swarmed over Corregidor. No doubt, too, the general had many times pondered the fate of his troops who were outnumbered, out of ammunition, food, and medical supplies, and thus compelled to surrender. The tide of hope had reached its lowest ebb for Americans when General Jonathan Wainwright sat at the surrender table, and the American flag was lowered on Corregidor. General MacArthur wanted more information about the condition of the prisoners taken on Corregidor and elsewhere in the Philippines. The word had gotten around about the death march, the forced march of the American prisoners by the Japanese, which caused many to die. These were the troops the general had in mind when he returned to the Philippines. The general had all of those depressing memories of 1942 to consider while he directed the battle in Manila 3 years later, during February 1945. An isolated pocket of Jap resistance developed in Manila's city prison, called Bilibid. Filipinos brought in word that American prisoners, many captured on Corregidor, were being held in Bilibid. We stepped up the attack and raced toward the city prison. Inside Bilibid, we wiped out the Japs and found the GI prisoners starved, abused, old beyond their years, but possessing an undaunted spirit. They lined up for chow with a 3-year appetite. These were young fighting men on Corregidor. Now they were no longer young, but they were alive. While the battle raged on, preparations were made for an aerial invasion of Corregidor. For Manila could not be secure without Corregidor in our hands. A parachute jump would be coordinated with an amphibious landing on the island fortress. Air Force and Navy pounded the rock while the troop carriers flew in the parachutists. And when the drop zone on Corregidor was lined up, there was nothing left to do but jump. GIs were dropped right where they were needed. While the parachutists seized their objectives on top of the island, an amphibious task force hit the beaches. Another airdrop of supplies, for at first, everything was delivered by parachute. Although Corregidor was lightly defended, every Jap there fought a fanatical battle. While the island fighting continued, the battle in Manila was going into the final phases. All of the enemy forces alive had withdrawn into the walled city south of the Pasig River. Now the Japs literally had their backs to the wall. They couldn't escape and wouldn't surrender. So we got set for the final round. The plan, roughly, was to concentrate our artillery, mortar, and small arms fire on the enemy while we crossed the Pasig. Wire communications were strung to assure the closest coordination of overhead fire. Finally, when everything was all set, the order was given to commence firing. Up assault boats and amphibious tracked vehicles and then made the first river crossing attempt. We had no way of knowing how successful our concentration of fire had been on the enemy in the walled city, but we found that they apparently were effective since the only incoming fire on us was small arms. Soon we were pouring across the river, getting established on the south side and moving toward the closest wall of the walled city. All of us knew by now that the toughest barrier of Manila was directly ahead, the 14-foot thick wall of Intramuros. While we approached our objective, our artillery and tracked vehicles gave us direct fire support. Between the river and the walled city was an open park area. And as we moved over it, we realized that this was the first open spot we had crossed since the Battle of Manila had begun. The closer we got to the walled city, the more we saw of the effectiveness of our artillery and mortar fire in softening up the enemy positions. Filipinos willingly pointed out prepared defensive positions of the enemy. Finally, we reached the outside wall. It took a great deal of probing to find the proper place to make the assault. For breaching this fortress was no easy matter regardless of how much artillery we had poured into it. But we finally cracked it. Once inside Intramuros, the city within the walls, the battle was suddenly over. Only the rubble and chaos of combat remained. And among the debris, we found human wreckage. Many of the Filipinos who had lived in Intramuros were dead. Those who somehow miraculously survived started a great mass exodus across the river to go anywhere. Anywhere away from the horrors of the walled city. Although the fighting in Manila was over, there still was one more military action to be taken. A general had said he would return. He had. Now, with a flag-raising ceremony on Corregidor, the Battle of Manila was officially over.
And that's how the Battle of Manila went. It was a rough one. Gruesome at times. And I thank my lucky stars I got out of it okay. Some of my best friends didn't.
Maybe you'll understand how indebted I feel towards them.
Yeah, I guess so.
Look, you gotta come out to the house and see the wife. I can't tell you how happy she'll be to meet you again. Why don't you come out some night for dinner? Soon.
Whatever you say.
Good. Looks like we've got some unfinished business here.
Yeah, it sure does.
Well, there's one way to finish it. But good.
That's just the way it happened, and a good finish it was for a true story. In an important sense, the incident has meaning for all of us, for it brings into sharp focus the great sacrifices and courage which typify our armed forces. It is this type of unsung action that gives depth and meaning and purpose to military history and to a country's heritage. Oh yes, one more thing I'm sure about. It'll be a long time before I can forget Charlie's place. It will always remind me of a certain careless motorist and a good-natured, forgiving cop.
The Big Picture is an official report for the armed forces and the American people. Produced by the Army Pictorial Center. Presented by the Department of the Army in cooperation with this station.